Hey, you're on the Bible Forum. This is Warren Sprouse. It's December 31st. Happy New Year. We're going to be spending this time together, the next couple of hours anyway, and we're going to be looking at life through a biblical lens. I want to share some things that I have learned this week, some things that have occurred that I think are of value, something important to you. Did you hear on the news about the fire in New York City up in the Bronx this couple of days ago? The New York Fire Commissioner said the investigators believe that this Bronx apartment building fire that left at least 12 people dead was started by a child, a 3-year-old child playing with a stove. I don't think there's any comment necessary to a statement like that. Could happen to anybody, but maybe this is a commentary on our parenting today. You do know there are parents who leave their children at home while they go to work. Little guys, maybe with little bigger guys watching them. Sometimes they leave them asleep at night while they go to work. Some parents work and come home and they try to sleep during the day, cat nap while the kids are around, and now the kids are off school and things are happening. This is where we are in some segments of our society, and it's growing on us. And here we have 12 people. The parents, whoever they may be, got up, realized what was going on, picked up their kids and got them out of the house. They didn't shut the door. And the fire got out and went up through this apartment building and just destroyed everything. Fire tends to go up, and it was a sad story. Do you have any of these new electronic toys? They don't actually have to be games or anything like that. It might just be the baby monitors. But apparently there's some new games that have come out, games with names I don't recognize. My Friend Kayla. I don't know what that is. Another one called IQ, Intelligent Robot. And another one called Aristotle. They're just some of the toys that parents are buying for their children. They're electronic, they're digital, and they are always on. Sort of like Siri and that bunch. They hear every sound in the room. This week we heard about a Norwegian coalition called the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood, which represents a number of other public interest and privacy organizations, pointing out in a new letter this week that it was a year ago they made their complaint to the FTC over how these games work, and yet nothing is being done. And how parents are not told that these games have this capacity. Parents have not given permission for this sort of thing to happen, and they fail to prevent strangers and predators from eavesdropping on your children and the events in and around your home or wherever the games are being played. They call it stalking. Retailers like Toys R Us dropped the devices. Walmart took the toys out of their stores when a public interest group complained. But Amazon has yet to take any action, the report said. It also was discovered that brands of smart watches, brands like Carafe and Safe Tracker, actually put children at risk. Data is stored unsafely, and they can easily be overtaken by a hacker who might prey upon that child. Now, this story comes out of Norway. But if it's happening in Norway, is it happening here? Do we now have to be more careful with our electronic toys? Does anybody know where this technology is taking us? Think about it. If you are in any way connected to the digital world, your life is not private. In a video I watched this week, a man is able to access the reporter's cell phone, email, credit cards, and much more, gaining information as to passwords and getting the authority to change them. And this was done all in about 5 minutes or less. The video shows a woman doing exactly the same kind of thing while the reporter watches in horror. So deal with it. Or get rid of all digital electronic devices, phones, computers, watches, burglar alarms, baby monitors, cars, if they were built after the 1990s. Welcome to the digital age and to the 20th millennium. A report from the Senate showed that about 40% of births in the United States happen out of wedlock. That's not news. Roger Verbergen, who is deputy managing editor at the National Review, is convinced that the hike in non-marital births is likely a result of what he calls moral behavior and social changes, things that occurred since the sexual revolution overhauled the American landscape. Can I get a universal duh? The Senate report is entitled Love, Marriage, and the Baby Carriage: The Rise in Unwed Childbearing. It was released this month, December 2017. The report found that a number of shotgun marriages have actually fallen. In the early 1960s, 43% of unwed pregnancies led to shotgun marriages. Today, that number is 9%. What changed? People aren't getting married. Corporate morality has changed. Marriage is passé. I certainly don't need a preacher or a judge or a piece of paper to make sure that I love you, that I stay connected to you, that I take care of you, that I have a commitment to you. We can just live together. And they're still having babies. That's the world. If you have been asleep for the last, 25, 30 years, you probably missed the whole global warming issue. Got kicked up in the 1980s. It keeps circulating and rotating around, and we got all this stuff. Well, global warming changed a number of years ago to climate change. We don't call it global warming anymore because reality is the atmosphere is not warming. It warms, it cools, it warms, it cools. We now call it climate change. Only now, all of that is gone. The crazies were blaming human beings and their fossil fuels. Now, there's evidence that these things are actually cyclical and that they are regulated more by the variations in solar activity than anything else. During 2017, there were 120 papers that were published in scientific journals linking historical and modern climate change to variations in solar activity and its modulators, things like clouds and cosmic rays. Only 13 of these publications forecast global cooling. You see, it's always been about fossil fuels heating up the Earth's average temperatures. And guided by this hypothesis, global warming has become an industry with the buying and the selling of carbon credits that grant permission to use carbon fuel, along with massive tax plans to pay for alternative energy programs and much more. But now, apparently solar scientists are increasingly forecasting a period of very low activity in the cosmos that will commence in the next few years, sometime around 2020, and last till 2025. What's the result? Well, they're almost unanimous in saying that the result is going to be a grand cooling effect. This will lead, they said, to climate cooling, even to a little ice age type conditions. But inquiring minds want to know, if it's all about human beings corrupting the system, fossil fuels and the like, then what changed? And the answer is nothing. It's never been about human beings corrupting the system. It has always been about solar fluctuation and cloud cover, the ebb and the flow. And it's always also been about money. In 1895, the panic was over an imminent ice age. In the late 1920s, it was global warming, which continued into the 1950s. What changed? 1/2 of 1 degree of average temperature. That's what changed between the cooling and the heating. In 1975, the New York Times headline blared, "A major cooling widely considered to be inevitable." 1975. By 1981, it was back to global warming. The Times, quoting 7 government atmospheric scientists who predicted global warming of an almost unprecedented magnitude. Today, in order to cover their bases, much of the press has changed its terminology from global warming to climate change or climate catastrophe. They're just making sure they got all their bases covered. The researcher that compiled these results used excerpts from 13 recent papers on the topic that discusses global cooling, the imminent global warming. I can't say that word, global cooling. 7 of them from 2017 and a few each from 2016 and 2015. He found these things run in cycles of about 200 years. That's what the old folks used to say before we had all this technology and could measure it. Apparently there have been 6 such reversals since 1000 AD. Described as protracted solar minimums, and another one is looming, according to the report. The truth is, everything appears to be far less spectacular than what many would have us to believe. He said. I say, duh. We just don't think, do we? We've talked about it here on the Bible Forum. History shows us. The Bible talks about a global flood and about the time that was taking place, and the next few thousand years, scientists have recorded the earth was in a very cold place. Everything they find points to that, freezing here and there. Massive freezing. Well, what would you expect if the globe was covered with water? It would cool down tremendously. And then around 1300 AD, there was this grand warming effect. We had, what was the disease that ran rampant during the Middle Ages? And it came as a result of the warmer temperatures. And there was a tremendous increase in birth, a tremendous increase in productivity, foodstuffs and all of that. The earth was warming up. And right behind that came what is called a little ice age. And when we were in the midst of our war with Great Britain, Valley Forge, and the men suffering through that winter, we were coming out of that little ice age. It was far colder for a far longer period of time those days than it is now. Now we get normal back and forth. But the weather people are going a little bit crazy because the weather patterns we're facing today seem to be a little different. They have forecast future cooling. The earth rotates back and forth, people. But there's no money in that. you do know it's all about the money, right? And the power. Yeah.